Increasingly in a place mentally that I just don't want to be. I've never been a conspiracy theorist. I've never been any of these, you know. I've never been a John Bircher or anything. I always thought those people were crazy. But the more you learn and the more you look at history, this weekend I was reading about the crash of 1907 and how that thing was controlled and what came out of that and came to the Fed. I mean, we're repeating the same mistake, and it was always to give these private individuals control almost a fourth branch of government or a separate tree of our economic system. How do we untangle ourselves from this?
Well, there is no more ominous power than to give this authority to a secret bank to create money out of thin air.
Here's where they stand. $29 billion for Bear Stearns, $200 billion, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, now $85 billion to bail out AIG. And in the president's $168 billion stimulus package and another proposed $50 billion stimulus package, we are talking more than $500 billion.
Well,
where is the money going to come from if you have to put it up?
Well, obviously it'll come from the government, but I would say this.
Who is the government?
The taxpayer.
I don't know anybody who has done their homework, has researched history, and who's good at math, who would tell you that we can grow our way out of this problem.
Economic growth alone is unlikely to solve the nation's impending fiscal problems.
Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke validated much of Walker's take on the situation at congressional hearings this year, and so did ranking Republicans and Democrats on the Senate Budget Committee.
This is not just about numbers. We are mortgaging the future of our children and grandchildren at record rates, and that is not only an issue of fiscal irresponsibility, it's an issue of immorality.
Christine, America's been around for 240 years or something as a republic. In that period of time, we built up debt of $5 trillion by elected officials. Now, we shouldn't have, but we did. Last weekend alone, we doubled the debt. $5 trillion more by people who are committing fraud, who are committing illegal activities, and now all of a sudden, not you, but all of us who are Americans are going to have to pay an extra $5 trillion in one weekend for private people who committed fraud. This is outrageous.
I agree that the Federal Reserve is basically the first outsourcing of the federal government. The central banking function is funded entirely by bank fees, not by congressional appropriations, and basically is the core presence in our financial system in the government by the bankers and other financial institutions.
America is a house of cards, and it's about to collapse.
Michael, do you feel that?
I agree. I think it could be any catalyst. I mean, certainly it could be a terrorist event, but I think we're so vulnerable now that, in fact, it could be something you completely don't expect.
Okay, there's a dollar crisis out there, and people's money is being stolen. People who have saved, they're being robbed. I mean, if you have a devaluation of the dollar at 10%, people have been robbed of 10%. But how can you pursue this policy without addressing the subject that somebody's losing their wealth because of a weaker dollar, and it's going to lead to higher interest rates and a weaker economy?
In 1877, that a French author and playwright by the name of Victor Hugo wrote a book called History of a Crime. It was published into many languages, including English. Very few people have read the book, but almost everyone has heard the English translation of one sentence taken from that book, and that is this one. Greater than the force of mighty armies is the power of an idea whose time has come. And that's the kind of a power that I want to discuss with you today. The purpose of my presentation is to advocate an idea that if pursued with enough energy and diligence by a sufficient number of people, is so powerful that the forces of totalitarianism with all of their agencies of coercion cannot stand against it.
What would be the first two things you would do if you were in Mr. Bernanke's seat tomorrow morning?
I would abolish the Federal Reserve and I would resign. Step one is abolish the Fed, and step two is resign.
How would this help the 300 million Americans that you say aren't being helped out by the Fed's activities yesterday?
Then we don't have anybody printing money. We don't have inflation in the land. We don't have a collapsing U.S. dollar. We start to have a sound currency again, and we start to get rid of inflation. Inflation is not good for the world. No country in the world has ever succeeded by debasing its currency.
Can you imagine how great a nation we'd have if we didn't have the Federal Reserve System printing all this money?
After 12 years of manipulations of the U.S. economy on the part of the Second Bank of the U.S., the American people had had just about enough. Opponents of the bank nominated a dignified senator from Tennessee, Andrew Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, to run for president. This is his home, the Hermitage. No one gave Jackson a chance initially. The bank had long ago learned how the political process could be controlled with money. To the surprise and dismay of the money changers, Jackson was swept into office in 1828. Jackson was determined to kill the bank at the first opportunity and wasted no time in trying to do so.
It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of our government. More than 8 million of the stock of this bank are held by foreigners. Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence would be more formidable and dangerous than a military power of the enemy. If government would confine itself to equal protection and, as heaven does its rains, shower its favor alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be a wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles.
After his second term as president, Jackson retired here to the Hermitage outside of Nashville to live out his life. He is still remembered here for his determination to kill